The famous races from the Far East to Europe and America of the clipper ships with their bulging sails and decks laden with cargoes of tea, silk and spices may long be over. But in Hong Kong at least, the era of the classic tall ships has been revived with the building of the brigantine Fung for the China Coast Territory's Outward Bound Trust, thus returning one branch of this worldwide trust to its original sailing heritage. Brooke prepared the plans for the 132-foot brigantine. Furnaces melted the lead ingots for Fung's 38-ton keel, followed by hours of hot and dangerous work before the liquid lead could be poured into the keel mould at Kong and Halverson's yard in Hong Kong. Many differing opinions were considered before it was finally decided that the vessel should be constructed of timber, and Hong Kong shipbuilders are second to none in this art. The main timbers of the vessel were made of yakel from the Philippines, whilst the planking was of two skins, the inner being mahogany and the outer skin of teak. "150 workers were employed on the construction of the vessel. Soon the frames of the Fung did indeed rise majestically over Junk Bay. Much crucial work had to be done at this stage. Attaching the frames to the keel was no easy task. Long galvanized bolts had to be carefully fitted and fixed into place. Soon the interior lines of a truly classic ship became apparent, and it was time for the plaque-laying ceremony. Executive Director, Jack Tucker.
Now, when Outward Bound started 10 years ago, the programs were orientated to a land-based ideal, including rock climbing, mountain walking, and these provided the main challenge to the trainees on the courses. Now, some 4 years ago, the Trust foresaw that the Sai-Kung Peninsula would eventually become developed. Roads would be driven through it, the beaches would get crowded, and it was only a matter of time before the peninsula would not entirely suit the purposes of Outward Bound. We needed a better testing area, and this is a reality we've had to face, and if we wish Outward Bound to survive in Hong Kong and go from strength to strength, then the sensible alternative is to go to sea. Now, under this curtain is a plaque which eventually will be placed on the ship's main steering wheel for all to see. And I consider it a great honour and a privilege to be allowed to ask Peter Williams to unveil this plaque on this occasion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased indeed to be here today to represent the stewards at the unveiling of this commemorative plaque to be installed, as we just heard, on the sail training ship Fung.
Fung continued to take shape, with the work paid for entirely by the Royal Hong Kong Jockey Club. The total cost was $1 million US. Altogether, it took 18 months to build her. That meant enduring Hong Kong's typhoon season, when torrential rain and high winds can be a headache for any boat builder. But the Hong Kong craftsmen, many of whom grew up constructing traditional Chinese sailing junks as their forefathers had before them, carried on with the task through fair weather and foul. Meanwhile, Yacht Spar of New Zealand completed the biggest job they'd ever undertaken and produced the 115-foot mainmast, the foremast and spars. Always under the critical eye of designer Brooke. Back in Hong Kong, the teak deck was laid and many other finishing touches were added. The deck itself was carefully caulked. It needed to be. It would have to endure many hours of scrubbing down by outward-bound trainees. Below decks, the joinery was completed, and then sailmakers Chung Lee took a hand.
Okay.
In keeping with the desire to build as much of the ship as possible in Hong Kong, Chung Lee were the obvious choice. This old established loft had sail-suited such famous square riggers as Zagres and Christian Radic, and Ji Fung presented no problem. The heavy engine that was to be used by the Ji Fung was raised by shear legs in the traditional manner. Workmen said they preferred shear legs to cranes because cranes sometimes fell over. The engine itself is an 8-cylinder Gardiner, a brand used by Hong Kong fishing junks for many years. It was manufactured in Britain and is able to propel the Ji Fung through the water at 9 knots. To supply the electricity requirements of ancillary equipment, 2 generators are used. Next, the binnacle came aboard and was checked off. The mess deck received a trial run, and carpenters completed table fiddles and a host of other interior fittings. The ship accommodates 40 trainees, and air conditioners are installed to protect the wood more than to provide comfort for students. Finally, Lady Cater, wife of Hong Kong's Chief Secretary Sir Jack Cater, launched the Ji Fung in the traditional manner with a bottle of champagne. Despite a strong crosswind, the 200-ton vessel rolled smoothly down the specially constructed slipway into her natural habitat. Still a trifle ungainly without her rigging and sails, she was nevertheless the toast of Hong Kong that day in October 1980. And the designer and boatyard officials were happy that she sat so well in the water. She was not to be bare above decks for long. The masts had arrived by ship from New Zealand and were taken alongside the Ji Fung by a lighter. Now began the intricate job, using the lighter's derricks, of actually stepping the mast. Work proceeded smoothly, but it took half a day to get both masts in place. Seafarers' customs demand that a gold coin be placed at the foot of the mainmast, and this was duly done under the watchful eye of the future crew. Now her silhouette stood out properly in the evening sky, and already the first outward-bound trainees were ready to go aboard to prepare the Ji Fung for her maiden voyage to Manila.
Okay, well, there are a lot of problems which have arisen over the last 24 hours. I'd just like to highlight them. We mustn't put anything solid down the heads. The piping system is very restricted, and it'll just choke up the whole system, and it will be your job to clear it. Most of all, don't be seasick in the heads, because there are only 10 on board, and with 50 of you wanting to use them, you can't tie them up. So come on deck and be seasick over the lee rail if you are going to be seasick at all. Just a reminder to those who don't know about the Outward Bound School, the Now our motto is to serve, to strive, and not to yield. Well, the last 24 hours you've just been serving, you've been putting the ship together, you've been storing ship, you've been cleaning it, you've just been generally working up for this intended voyage of over 1,200 miles. We're now about to strive to learn to sail. Amongst us we have some quite experienced yachtsmen, and I'm sure that we'll make a very good crew. We've certainly got plenty of willingness. I'm absolutely delighted with the enthusiasm that I've seen so far. When you hear the rapid ringing of the bell and constant short blasts on the foghorn, come up on deck with your life jacket and stand by these stations. We may at times have an all-hands-on-deck situation. This is not the same thing as a muster or a fire alarm. What this means is that in order to keep the ship under control, perhaps there's an approaching squall, we need everybody up here to get sails down, to trim sails, to do various other tasks. And when we say all hands on deck, it means everybody, including the cook. You just drop whatever you're doing and just come straight out. If we don't do that, we may run into problems. Final thing, I hope you all have a very enjoyable voyage.
Hong Kong radio, Hong Kong radio, Hong Kong radio. This is sailing ship Fung, sailing ship Fung. Victor Romeo Foxtrot Charlie, Victor Romeo Foxtrot Charlie. Calling on 6215.5, listening 6521.9. You read, over.
Fung. This is Hong Kong radio, receiving you loud and clear. Weather report. Northeast, course 8. South of Brattas Reef. Moderate seas becoming rough.
The return voyage to Hong Kong is always memorable, but the first was especially so. The Fung sailed up the famous harbour, and her crew manned the yards and ratlins in traditional formal salute to the Royal Naval Base at Tamar, which received her on her return. It was a spectacular sight as she came into dock, and not every vessel receives the honour of a salute from the fireboat Alexander Grantham. And at the quayside to welcome her were Hong Kong's governor, Sir Murray MacLehose, and Tamar's captain-in-chief, Andrew Waugh. Sir Murray, a keen sailor himself, was most interested to hear details of the voyage from the crew and Captain Gasson. But Fung was not built to be a dockside. Soon she was off once more, sails hoisted, leaning gently in the wind, cutting through the greenish waters of the South China Sea. A remarkable ship, a remarkable endeavour, and a remarkable enterprise for Hong Kong's Outward Bound Trust, which, with foresight, has shown that character training, self-reliance, and the outward bound spirit can still be engendered in the classic manner of men before the mast on great sailing ships.